They gave us wonders that still break our brains today, but behind those gold masks was a story that's a lot more complicated. It's a story of ruthless ambition, brutal politics, and a level of self-confidence that's almost hard to comprehend. These weren't just rulers, they were extremists. They pushed the limits of what was possible, not just in architecture but in religion, warfare and human endurance itself. So before we get started, if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It makes a huge difference. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe. Number 10, Sneferu, the obsessive perfectionist. Alright, kicking us off at number 10 is a pharaoh whose obsession with getting it just right literally changed the Egyptian landscape forever. Sneferu. Before him, royal tombs were impressive, but they were basically big tiered cakes. Sneferu looked at that and thought, nope, not good enough. He was driven by this vision to create a perfect smooth-sided pyramid, a literal stairway to heaven. His first major attempt, the pyramid at Maidum, was an architectural faceplant. Scholars still go back and forth on whether it collapsed under its own weight or was dismantled later, but either way, it was a colossal failure. But Sneferu didn't quit. His second try is the famous bent pyramid. Halfway through, his architects had that sinking feeling you get when you realize you've measured something completely wrong. The angle was too steep. Instead of scrapping it, they just changed the angle. It's a genius improvisation, really, but for a living god, it was a monument with a giant permanent oops built into it. Still not happy, he commissioned a third pyramid, the Red Pyramid. Using all the hard-won lessons from his failures, he finally nailed it. It became the first successful true pyramid in history, the prototype for the Great Pyramid of Giza. His genius was this relentless, almost scientific trial and error, but his extremism? The sheer scale of it all. It's argued that Sneferu may have moved more stone than any other pharaoh in history, including his own son Khufu, who built the big one. Imagine the resources, the manpower, the sheer human effort it took to build 3 mountains of stone, all because one guy was a fanatical perfectionist. He was a brilliant innovator, but his ambition was a form of tyranny over the laws of physics and the limits of his people. Number 9, Seti I, the Avenging Restorer. At number 9, we have a pharaoh who walked into a kingdom in absolute chaos and decided to fix it with a sword in one hand and a chisel in the other. Seti I. He came to power after this wild historical episode called the Amarna period, where a previous pharaoh had basically deleted Egypt's gods. The empire was weak, the culture was a mess, and Seti's job was to put it all back together. His mission had 2 parts: bring back the old gods and reconquer the old lands, and he went after both with extreme prejudice. Seti was a brilliant general who personally led his armies to smack down rebellions and reclaim territory. He renewed major hostilities with the growing Hittite Empire, fighting them to a standstill and making it clear that Egypt was back in business, and he wasn't shy about it. He had his victories carved in massive sprawling reliefs on the temple walls at Karnak, basically the ancient world's version of a military highlight reel for everyone to see. At the same time, he oversaw an artistic renaissance. The reliefs at his temple in Abydos are some of the most beautiful things ever carved. But inside that temple, he also carved the Abydos King List, a list of all the pharaohs, well, almost all of them. He deliberately erased the heretic kings from the Amarna period, a cold, calculated act of historical cancellation. And that's where the tyranny comes in. Seti I wasn't just restoring Egypt, he was forcibly deleting a chapter of its history he didn't like. His genius was stabilizing a nation and creating breathtaking art, but his method was absolute. He was a warrior who imposed order with force and controlled the past itself. Number 8. Tutankhamun, the boy king of vengeful restoration. So you've probably heard of this guy. At number 8, it's Tutankhamun. Not because of anything he really did, he was just a kid, but because of the extreme movement he represents. He got the throne when he was about 9 years old, born as Tutankhaten, the son of the heretic king Akhenaten. You know, the one who broke everything. Tutankhamun's genius, or more likely the genius of his powerful advisors, was in becoming the poster boy for returning to the old ways. It was a masterclass in PR. One of his first moves was changing his name to Tutankhamun, signaling that the god Amun was back on top. He issued decrees that restored the temples, the priests, and all the money his dad had taken away. He even moved the entire capital back to its traditional spot, effectively turning his father's revolutionary city into a ghost town. It was a brilliant political move that healed a massive rift in the country. But here's the thing, this restoration was also an act of total cultural vengeance. As they were rebuilding the old temples, they systematically dismantled his father's monuments. They smashed his statues and chiseled his name off of everything, condemning him to be forgotten, which for an Egyptian was the worst fate imaginable. So while King Tut was just a boy, his reign was the vehicle for this tyrannical erasure. His famous golden tomb is a symbol not of a powerful king, but of a puppet at the centre of a brutal and absolute rejection of his own father's world. It just goes to show that in Egypt, fixing things could be just as tyrannical as breaking them in the first place. Number 7. Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt. Coming in at number 7 is a pharaoh who might have had the biggest chip on his shoulder in Egyptian history, Thutmose III. Often called the Napoleon of Egypt, he was an absolute military machine. But for the first 22 years of his reign, he was pharaoh in name only, completely overshadowed by his stepmother and co-regent Hatshepsut. When she finally died, it was like a bottle of soda that had been shaken for 2 decades. He just exploded onto the world stage. His military genius is pretty much undeniable. The official record boasts of over 16 campaigns, and while all victorious is probably the king's own propaganda, he was incredibly successful. His most legendary battle was at Megiddo. His generals told him the main mountain pass was a suicidal trap, so naturally he chose to lead his army right through it. The gamble paid off, and he smashed a whole coalition of his enemies. He was a master of logistics, siege warfare, and he conquered more territory than almost any other pharaoh, building the largest empire Egypt had ever seen. But this great conqueror had a darker side. Late in his reign, decades after Hatshepsut was gone, he started a campaign to systematically erase her from history. Her statues were smashed, her name carved out, her images defaced. For a long time, everyone thought it was just petty revenge. But a more recent theory suggests a colder, more tyrannical motive. By erasing the precedent of a successful female pharaoh, he was trying to secure the throne for his own son and eliminate any future path to power for his rivals. So, Thutmose III built Egypt's golden age with one hand, while tyrannically trying to rewrite history with the other. Number 6. Hatshepsut, the woman who would be king. And speaking of whom, breaking every rule in the book to grab the ultimate prize is our number 6, Hatshepsut. Now, she wasn't the expected heir. She was the daughter of one king and the wife of another. Her job was to be queen. But when her husband died, leaving the throne to his infant son, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut saw her chance. She started as his regent, the power behind the throne, but soon she just took it. She declared herself pharaoh. Her genius was pure political theatre. In a world run entirely by men, she needed to convince everyone her rule was legitimate. So she launched this brilliant propaganda campaign. On the walls of her stunning temple at Deir el-Bahri, she had this story carved showing the god Amun himself as her real father. She started wearing all the symbols of a male pharaoh, including the kilt and the fake beard. It was a total reinvention of her image, and her reign was actually one of peace and prosperity. She launched massive building projects and re-established lucrative trade routes, bringing immense wealth back to Egypt. But in the eyes of tradition, her power grab was an extreme, almost tyrannical act. She upended the divine order. For over 20 years she was the dominant ruler, pushing the rightful heir into the background. While Egyptian ideology could be flexible, her move was so audacious that her successors felt they had to erase it. The fact that Thutmose III later tried to wipe her from the record shows just how radical her ambition was seen to be. She was a ruler who brought prosperity, but only by shattering tradition and seizing a power that, by all rights, wasn't supposed to be hers. All right, we're halfway through our list. From obsessive builders to rule-breaking queens, it's pretty clear that power in the ancient world was a complicated business. If you're fascinated by the weird mix of genius and tyranny in these leaders, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our future deep dives. Number 5. Khufu, the Pyramid God. At number 5, we have the man behind the most famous building in human history, Khufu. His name is forever tied to the Great Pyramid of Giza. For over 3,800 years, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. The sheer genius it took to pull it off is still something we struggle to fully grasp. The Great Pyramid is a miracle of math and logistics. It's made of about 2.3 million stone blocks. While most are a couple of tons, some of the granite beams inside weigh over 50 tons, and they were all moved and placed with incredible precision. The whole project was probably realised over a 20-year period by a highly organised workforce that some estimate to be in the tens of thousands. It was an eternal monument, meant to secure the king's journey to the afterlife and prove his status as a god on earth. But here's the shadow. While it wasn't built by slaves like in the movies, think about the level of human toil it required. An entire generation of labourers was organised around this one single, monumental task. Later Greek historians like Herodotus wrote that Khufu was a cruel tyrant who drained his country's resources and even forced his own daughter into prostitution to help pay for it. Now, that's almost certainly an exaggeration, but it points to a memory of a king whose ambition had absolutely no ceiling. The Great Pyramid is a symbol of genius, yes, but it's also a monument to the extreme power of one man to command the lives of an entire nation for his own immortal glory. Number 4. Narmer, the Bloody Unifier. Clawing his way to number 4 is a guy from the very dawn of Egyptian history, the man who smashed two kingdoms into one. Narmer. Many Egyptologists think he's the same person as the legendary Menes, the first king of a unified Egypt. His genius was that of a founder, a visionary who saw one powerful nation where there had only been two warring lands. His legacy is cemented on this one incredible artifact, the Narmer Palette. It's one of the first historical documents in the world. On one side, he's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, and on the other, the crown of Lower Egypt, the first time we see a king wearing both. It symbolises the creation of a unified state that would last for 3,000 years. This was the foundational act that made everything else possible, but the palette tells a much darker story. The iconography suggests a brutal, violent conquest. The main image shows Narmer with a mace held high, about to crush the skull of an enemy. Elsewhere, you see rows of decapitated foes. This wasn't a peaceful merger with a potluck dinner. The unification of Egypt was forged in blood. Narmer's genius was his vision for a single Egypt, but his method was pure tyranny. He was a warlord who brought his people together through force, setting the precedent that the pharaoh's power was absolute, built on military victory and the suppression of anyone who got in his way. Number 3. Akhenaten, the heretic king. Our top 3 kicks off with a pharaoh so extreme that his own people tried to pretend he never existed. Akhenaten. His genius, or maybe his madness, was to overthrow a religious system that had been humming along for 1,500 years. In a move that must have shocked everyone, Akhenaten declared that Egypt's whole pantheon of gods was fake. There was only one true god, the Aten, represented by the sun disk. He changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and launched a revolution. He shut down the ancient temples, especially those of the incredibly powerful god Amun-Ra, and seized all their wealth. Then he moved the entire capital to a brand new city he built in the middle of the desert. Even the art changed, becoming weird, elongated and strangely naturalistic. This wasn't just a reform, it was the tyrannical imposition of one man's belief system on an entire culture. While it's seen as one of the earliest state-sponsored monolatrous reforms in history, it was a disaster for many. The powerful priesthood was sidelined, and ordinary people were cut off from their traditional gods. While Akhenaten and his family hung out in their isolated new city, the affairs of the empire seemed to have been neglected. The backlash was so intense that after he died, his successors tore down his city, smashed his monuments, and struck his name from the king lists, treating him like a historical virus they had to scrub away. Number 2, Cleopatra VII, the Serpent of the Nile. Sliding into the number 2 spot is the last and probably most famous ruler of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. She was a figure of legendary charisma and intellect, a queen who played the game of power at the highest possible stakes, juggling the fate of her kingdom and the hearts of the most powerful men in the world. Her genius was statecraft. Descended from a Greek dynasty, she was one of the only Ptolemaic rulers to actually bother learning the Egyptian language, which made her popular with her people. She was a brilliant diplomat who knew Egypt's only hope for survival was to cleverly manage the rising superpower of Rome. She famously forged an alliance, both political and romantic, with Julius Caesar, which secured her throne. After he was assassinated, she teamed up with Mark Antony, and together they ruled the entire eastern half of the Roman world from her capital in Alexandria. But behind that brilliant mind was a streak of absolute tyranny, especially when it came to her own family. The Ptolemies were notorious for their brutal family drama, and Cleopatra was no exception. Her brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII, conveniently died in battle against Caesar's forces. Later, she had her own younger sister, Arsinoe IV, executed in the temple precinct at Ephesus to eliminate any threat to her and her son's power. Roman propaganda painted her as a debauched foreign temptress, but the truth is she was a ruthless, calculating ruler fighting to save her kingdom. She was a genius of politics and a tyrant to her own bloodline, who gambled everything against Rome and brought the 3,000-year story of the pharaohs to its dramatic, tragic end. Number 1, Ramesses II, the Great Egotist. And at number 1, the most extreme ruler in Egyptian history, a pharaoh whose ego was as big as the monuments he built to advertise it, Ramesses II, aka Ramesses the Great. His reign of nearly 67 years was a masterclass in propaganda, branding, and the sheer force of will. Ramesses' genius was in understanding that power is performance. He was the ultimate spin doctor. His most famous battle, the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, was actually a messy, inconclusive tactical draw that he was lucky to survive. But when he got back to Egypt, he plastered the walls of nearly every temple with epic reliefs, showing him as a lone hero, single-handedly smiting his foes with the help of the gods. He even signed the world's first recorded international peace treaty with those same Hittites, another brilliant diplomatic move, and he built on a scale that's just staggering, commissioning colossal temples like Abu Simbel. But the size of his genius was dwarfed by the size of his ego. Ramesses didn't just build new stuff. He was a serial usurper. He'd walk up to the statues and monuments of previous pharaohs and just have his own name carved over theirs, tyrannically stealing their credit. He built a new capital city named after himself, Pyramesses, and fathered over 100 children to make sure his legacy was physically inescapable. More than anyone, Ramesses the Great made his own identity the identity of Egypt. He wasn't just the king, he was the state. His reign was stable and prosperous, but it was built on a foundation of the most relentless, overwhelming propaganda imaginable. His genius was creating an image of godlike power. His tyranny was making sure no one in history would ever, ever forget his name. So what do we make of all this? From the bloody conquest of Narmer to the defiant end of Cleopatra, the story of the pharaohs is a story of extremes. They were geniuses who pushed the boundaries of art, architecture, and what it even meant to build a nation. They were also tyrants who wielded absolute power, who waged brutal wars and rewrote history itself to fit their narrative. Their legacy is carved right into the stone of the desert, a permanent reminder of the two faces of power. The very monuments that fill us with awe were often born from a will so strong it couldn't tolerate any dissent. It just proves that in the ancient world, and maybe in our own, the line between a great leader and a terrifying tyrant is often as fine as the edge of a chisel. So I'm curious, which of these rulers do you think was the most extreme? Was it the heretic Akhenaten, the conqueror Thutmose III, or the great propagandist Ramesses II? Let me know your take down in the comments. Thanks for hanging out tonight.